Welcome back. Hopefully you got hot chocolate and coffee and all the things. So we've got 25 minutes and we'll do our best to work through the questions and answers. And then we'll pick two of the questions that we thought were the most helpful. We'll try and go as quickly as we can so that we can get through most of the questions, some great questions that came through. Let me start with the first one. How should a husband and wife manage their finances? I think, it's... Let's just get going with it straight off the bat, shall we? I want to be very careful here because they say, there's three ways to offend a person. Talk about money, sex, or religion, and you're bound to do it. So I'm nervous to prescribe anything. I want to try and give an answer that I think could work, but it may not work depending on the personalities that are involved in the marriage. I think a good way to start with a question as big and important as this, big questions are always best dealt with theologically. In other words, starting from a theological before we start with a practical side of things. If the scripture says, if Jesus says that a marriage is defined as one man, one woman that come together, and they are now one flesh. I think that really what he's doing there is he's setting a framework in place for unity, such that unity should be across the areas of life. So theologically, and again, I don't want to offend somebody here if you do this differently and you go, who are you? You're from Joburg, whatever. I'm not interested. I've just always felt that I think where there are high levels of trust, and it can only be done if there's high levels of trust, that money needs to be dealt with communally in the household. So if you want to have separate bank accounts, fine. If you want to have a joint bank account, but I feel like there needs to be transparency in terms of the earnings of both parties and a clear description of how the money is going to be dealt with communally. In other words, I do know couples who they take care of those expenses, they take care of those expenses. That's fine because they've clearly delineated who's going to do what, but they've added the sum total of their money together in order to get to that answer, and that's what I'm saying. Yeah. So whether you want to have separate bank accounts or joint bank accounts, we have one bank account and both salaries come into that bank account and we deploy the resources from there. But I feel like theologically there needs to be a summing together and then a deployment thereafter. So if one person wants to save or the other one wants to, that's all fine, but there needs to first be an addition, I think, because theologically there needs to be unity with the money. And then unity in the decisions would be the second element. So I'm talking about money being brought together for the purposes of deciding how to use those resources. But then unity, Christ's comment about man and woman being in unity extends to decision making as well. So a surefire way to create drama in your marriage is to spend on things where you haven't both agreed on it. And there's no easy way around that. You actually got to talk it through, argue it through, get a third party, go to arbitration, go to the CCMA. I mean, you got to do whatever you got to do. But if one party's spending while the other doesn't agree with that, yes, you're in for hiding later on.
Yeah. And so what we did really early on in our marriage is like we set an amount. Like we wanted freedom. I mean, the point is we each earn money. We wanted freedom to be able to spend some of that money, but we had a limit. We can't spend above a certain amount without a discussion because it would impact our bank balance significantly. I think what would be helpful for everyone is just to talk about the three areas that we teach our church on with regards to our money.
Save, spend, like those. Yeah, I was going to, absolutely. Okay. So just a helpful rule of thumb is to first give, then save, then spend. So give to God first, save second, and then spend. Make sure you're not saving before you're giving, and make sure you're not spending before you're saving. And the quantum is not important. It's actually the principle that I think God blesses. And it's stewardship on two levels before you get to the spending. The stewardship is firstly to give to God, to honor Him with the first fruits of our income. So that's the giving part of it, and to give to the poor as well. So giving, and again, the tithing, we would tithe 10%. So that quantum is important. But when it comes to saving, like people go, well, you got to save for retirement. You might want to save short-term rainy day fund, that kind of stuff. But the principle is even more important than the quantum. So give, save, and then spend. And it just keeps money in its rightful order, because money is everything spiritual, right? But money can take on an enormous power when it's not kept in check, and when it doesn't have guardrails to it. And I feel like give, save, spend are great guardrails to money. And I think God blesses the stewardship of giving to Him first, and then saving, living below our means. Even if it's just scraping together just a few rand to save, I believe God blesses that, and He then blesses and gives more resource in order for. And we've seen that happen in our own lives, when in seasons of less and seasons of more, just hold to the pattern, even though the amounts may change. Does that make sense?
Very good.
Second question was, how do you balance kids, serving, both having full-time jobs, and just life as Christians in a world where the petrol price is ruder than people?
It's a great
you
question.
Want to take the lead on that one?
Yeah, so I think for us in this space, we have decided what our priorities are. So we always decide, well, what are the bricks? What are the non-negotiables? What are the rocks that we are putting into this jar? And family time, serving God, marriage, kids, extended family, friends. So we always decide what are the rocks that we are putting into this jar, and then we outwork it on our calendars. And I'm not lying to you when I say Byron and I spend probably 2 hours to 3 hours a week, or every second week, depending on our calendars, planning our lives, so that the outworking of what we want to prioritize is in our calendars. So we would literally say, okay, you can go to gym on these days, and I'll go to gym on these days, and I'll take the kids here, and you go to because we have to each get our kids to different activities, and he's got meetings in this place, and I got meetings in that place, and we literally, then we'll say like, oh, we haven't got friends on this calendar. So then we'll be like, okay, let's find a night, let's invite some friends. Right? We haven't got a date night on this calendar. And so we literally outwork our priorities into our calendar. The one thing we've realized is it isn't always a perfect model, and it's not a problem to be solved, but a tension to be managed. We're never going to solve it. It's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be ideal, but we just have to be aware of it and continually tinker. And so we would say to our kids, like this weekend, hey guys, Mom and Dad are going to do some work. We're going to do some ministry. You're going to have a great time with Granny and Granddad, which they really are. But thank you for being part of our work in releasing us to minister. But on Monday, it's your special day. And then Byron gets a call to say, hey, I'm in town and I want to be with you on Monday. And he literally said to this man who's quite high up in the church world, he said to him, I'm so sorry. I would love to have a cup of coffee with you, but we have prioritized our kids on Monday because we would have been away for the weekend, and we want to pick them up from school and take them and do something special. And so it's literally intentional time with each other and with our kids. So it's never ideal. It's never always in perfect balance, but we assess the seasons. And when it's been an intense church season, then we have an intense family season after that. So we just keep the balance. Would you add anything?
Yeah, no, just it's planning, and it might sound unromantic. It might sound like systematic or boring or whatever the case is, but we just have to plan the big things that need to be in our lives. We just have to plan them in, And here's the thing: nothing really ever happens by accident. The only thing that happens by accident is decline. Yeah. Think about it. The only thing that happens like by default, the only thing that happens by default is decline. Take your garden and don't do anything to it, just neglect it, and the only thing that will happen to your garden is it'll decline. And so the only thing that happens by default, nothing worthwhile happens by default. The only thing that the only thing that happens by default naturally is decline. And so it takes a lot of intentionality, and it can be a schlep. It can honestly be a schlep. yeah, it's like we're tired, do it, now let's plan, but it's worth doing. I want to go to this question. The person wrote in and said, we're both one-time divorcees on our second marriage with each other. As believers, are we then doomed in the eyes of the Lord? Thanks. Again, I want a big question like that. I want to go to it theologically first. Ephesians 4:30, Paul says, really, there's only one unforgivable sin. It's the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit, or quenching the Holy Spirit, or repetitively and repeatedly and deliberately turning our back on the advances of the Lord in our lives through the power of His Holy Spirit. So when God knocks on your door and you keep shutting the door, you keep shutting Him out, that's the only thing ultimately that can't be solved by the grace of God, because we don't open the door for it. So the answer to that question is no, not at all. We've seen many, many people find great freedom, great love, great joy. God's grace just covers their second marriages. I mean, I'll tell you a quick story. My grandparents, so my mom's parents, my granddad and my gran had great friends that they did everything together with. The only problem was that my grandfather took that too far, and he did everything with the other woman as well, and started an affair with her. And 5 years in, the family found out. So him and the other lady, they literally get booted into exile. This is all when I'm a lighty. I'm like 5 years old. They get sent to Namibia. Well, not sent, but they just decided, let's move to Windhoek. So off they go, the adulterers, look. And the other two, my gran and the other guy, they found comfort in each other's arms. They got married. So they just did like a swap. It's like Jerry Springer. It was just but here's the point. Yeah, going to make the point. The point is that both their second marriages were both better than their first marriage. Now, am I advocating for divorce and remarriage? Not necessarily. I'm just saying that if that's where you find yourself, can God's grace cover it? Absolutely. Is being divorced and remarried done? No. Absolutely. And I think we can see biblical precedent for that many times when the grace of God covers situations. So women at the well being one of them. Jesus just says, well, if you are on, what was it, number 6, get married, like do the right thing, Okay. Do you want to, number 5? Yeah. Okay, so listen to this one. As a geek, I dislike reboots. Okay, me too. That's why you should always have an Apple, because it never needs to reboot. Anyway, how do you soft reboot romance in the marriage where there's no time, energy, or space for physical intimacy in the stressful post-COVID life? I think whoever wrote this, this question is a question that's on the lips and hearts of like 90% of married couples. So first thing I want to say to you is you're in good company. What actionable or doable tips do you have to keep the flame burning hot? Do you want to go first?
I think the first thing I would say is there is time. That's the first thing I would say. I think if we have to, because we have time for what we prioritize. I really first want to say that, and I understand we are all stretched. I feel like everybody's trying to make up for the 2 years we were in lockdown. They're trying to do everything they didn't do in those 2 years in the post-COVID. So we are busy. I do understand that we are busy. But the first thing I want to just emphasize is we do have time for what we prioritize. I have time for TV. I have time for exercise. I have time to read. I have time for my kids. I have time for my husband, because I have chosen to have time for them. So I think the first thing is just to reframe that and say, I need to choose time for my spouse. And once you have chosen time for your spouse, priority number 1 is taken care of. I mean, we're all busy, but we can sit down and say, okay, this month, this is the date. And we literally go, it's your turn to plan the date this month. Surprise me. Go do a thing. And then next month, it's my turn to plan the date. And I plan the day. And we literally find a day, we prepare, the other person has to take care of it, but it's intentionally on the calendar. I think the whole concept of, and you may have heard this before, that women are ovens,
Yeah.
and men are microwaves, and romance is slow for a woman. It takes time. That needs to,
Percolate.
Be, drip fed almost, like tell your wife in the morning how much you love her, then in the afternoon send a text to say like looking forward to our date tonight. And we know for men, they don't need that, but the wives do.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things I would say, just communicating expectations that you love each other, prioritizing each other. Do you want to add?
I think the way sometimes to our hearts and from our hearts into our bodies, because this question was also about sex, is I think the love languages, the 5 love languages, has been really, really helpful. So if you've never encountered that before, I don't want to take too much time on this, but it's basically that every one of us have sort of a primary and then maybe a secondary love language. So the love languages are number 1, physical touch, number 2, gifts,
quality time,
acts of service, and words of affirmation. Thank you. Yeah, words of affirmation. So everybody's got one particular. If we can focus on speaking our spouse's love language in practical little ways throughout the day and the week, I think then that starts to help, because hearts start to feel spoken to, as opposed to just trying to muster up some physical intimacy.
And with love languages, what they say is that we usually try and love a person with our own love language. And it's so mine is quality time. So I would want to just be around Byron and I'm always like in his space, and he's like, what are you doing here? But that's not his love language. His love language is physical touch and words of affirmation. So if I put my hand on him, it's communicating that I love him. So understanding your partner and speaking their love language, not yours, is definitely a way to fire up your relationship.
Yeah. And the next question was kind of linked to that. What are some practical ways you can pursue your spouse, and how does this pursuit differ from showing them love in the way they receive love languages? Well, I think a useful way, like the love languages we've spoken about, but actually ask them, say, hey, how do you like to be pursued? Like what speaks to you? What's meaningful to you? What makes a difference to you? Because you might find that the way you're doing it is like not the way they want it, and there might be something there that they can communicate to you. And I don't think there are too many people that would react badly to the question of, hey, how could I love you better? How could I actually pursue your heart more or your heart better? So I think that's worth doing. The other thing, just on because they're talking about keep the flame burning hot, I think that so this might sound like it's being contrived, but it might be if the intimacy flame is burning really low, it might be worth your while just making a decision. And I don't want it to sound mechanical or robotic or like unromantic. It might be worth making a decision to just make love, like at a particular day or time or whatever the case is, and get the ball rolling again a little bit, get it started, because the less you kind of in it, it's just eventually can kind of just settle, hey, and you go, So it might just be worth coming together for that, and say, okay, let's make a plan. And it might feel mechanical, it might feel unromantic, it might not feel great in the moment, but I think what we're doing is we're building into the building blocks of our marriage, and physical intimacy is an important one on that. So I've had couples say to me that that's helped them just to kind of get things started again.
Yeah, and then after that, your souls would have mingled.
Yeah, and and then
it fosters more.
It does. Yeah, it does. There was. I was going to say. I think one of the biggest lies that our culture tells us is we must do what we feel like. Yeah. We actually need to do what's good for us. If that makes sense. So exercise, like 5 o'clock in the morning in winter, who feels like exercising? No. But is it good for us? You don't feel like eating fruit when there's ice cream close. You know what I'm saying? So so I don't feel like having sex might actually be a major lie that could be holding your marriage in captivity, because it's not actually about what you feel like doing, it's about actually what you need, what's good for you. And after, like Ken's saying, is after it's happened, there's a bringing together, a mingling of souls, and that's helpful.
Powerful.
How do you break away from the way your families did stuff and create your own traditions and ways to do things? How did you break away from the Lebs?
With a gun. No. For me, it's a decision. I would have said it was a decision. There has to be an acknowledgement of things that you loved and things that you didn't love. So firstly, I think it's a rude awakening, because to be honest, when you're young particularly, your parents are amazing. And they don't do anything wrong. Well, particularly I used to think that of my family. And then when you grow up, you start to think like, hey, that's a bit weird, right? It's a little dysfunctional what my family's doing there, because then you start to be exposed to other families and to see other things. Yeah. So firstly, there's an acknowledgement of what you do love about your family and what you need to stop doing or continue doing, a pattern of being. Listen, there are also many, many dysfunctional families that you just decide, like, hey, my dad was an alcoholic, I am not going to be an alcoholic. Like there's an active decision that needs to take place in order to start to create your own culture. And to create our own family culture required a lot of discussion, conversation. We have an acronym. Our surname is Chicken, and each of the letters of our surname stand for something. And so we have our own culture, like we are Christ followers with a healthy self-esteem. So we have created our own our acronym, and we tell our kids as we tell them in the car, this is who we are, this is how we do things. And we've created a culture of how we want to be as a family. And often we'll say, hey, this is not how we do things here. This is not our family. Hey, we don't treat each other like this. Just this other day, I said to my daughter, if Caleb was your best friend, would you do what you've just done? No, never. I said, well, that's how we're going to treat each other in this home, like he is your best friend. And so there's a culture that you create in your family, and it's a decision, and it's massive amounts of intentionality, and it needs to be done. What's the word? Not systematically. You can't do it once and then not do it consistently. It has to be enforced consistently. Yeah, thanks.
Right. What would you say is the needs of a woman and the needs of a man in marriage? I read something the other day that every man is asking the question, am I enough? Am I enough? And every woman is asking the question, do you see me? And I think that there's truth in that, actually, that I think every woman, particularly in a culture, in a world which has historically been very patriarchal, many women are going, do you see me? Do you value me? Do I matter to you, And every man is going like, am I enough for you? And so I think if a woman can let her man know that he's enough, and if a man can let his wife know that I see you, I think that goes a long way.
It's beautiful. And that wise man that Byron sees often, he said, our souls are shy.
Yeah.
And it's such a beautiful phrase, like our souls are shy as women, and we want to be seen.
Sure. Sure. This one says, I'm going quickly because of time. Sure. What do you do if your partner expects too much of you, asking for a friend? I'd like to offer some language to that, because I think, number one, you've got to talk about it. Yeah. And number two, you've got to talk about it in a way that's going to try and give rise to something positive and not negative. I think just a statement that says, I can see you expect this of me. I'm not sure I can live up to that expectation. I'm not sure I can deliver on that expectation. However, is there a way we can talk about this expectation and see if there's an expectation I can meet? I'll say that again. I can see you expect X of me, is that right? I'm not sure I can live up to that expectation or deliver on that expectation. Is there a way we can talk about your expectation and see if there's an expectation I can meet?
Because it's in that gap, remember,
Yeah.
of reality and expectation that the disappointment and the pain fosters. So it's really important that we start to bridge that gap. So we're saying, like, this is where I'm currently at. This is what you're expecting. How can we bring those two places closer together?
Absolutely.
That we can meet?
Yeah. Last one we'll deal with. Why does the question, how can I help you? Why does it feel like it relates more to the husband than to the wife? So someone who's going, feels like it's a thing for the guy to talk to the wife.
Saying it's loaded.
It's loaded, yeah.
it's really not loaded.
Yeah, I think if it's mutual, genuinely, if it's mutual, it can work. And I think the difficulty for us as men is, perhaps this is the rub that this person's feeling is, I think as men we are slightly more hesitant to ask for help or to even sometimes acknowledge that we need help. Sometimes we kind of got the illusion, we're under the illusion that we kind of got to bear it all and shoulder it all. So to whoever asked this question, can I suggest to you, it might actually be liberating if you thought about it sincerely and gave your wife a couple of ways that she could help you.
Yeah.
You might find great liberty on the other side of it, and it could help you.